Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
We are thrilled to be joined today by Hope Hooton. Hope is a child safety advocate, author, and podcast host who campaigns for family court reform after the tragic loss of her two children, Alec and Lydia, a few years ago. Hope, we're super grateful that you're here and that you use your voice to speak up for children. So I guess first of all, just thanks for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you've done so much in the last few years in the way of advocacy. Your book's titled "There's Still Hope: A Journey of Adversity, Tragedy, and Unshakable Faith." And let me start off by saying, just so admirable the work that you're doing through the pain. Your email is "Hope Through the Pain" or "Hope in the Pain." I know a lot of the things that you do are in that vein, and I guess just talk to us, back us up to the story of. Tell us about your kids. Tell us about Alec and Lydia, and I don't know, just get us going there and get into your story.
Okay, so Alec was 7 years old. He loved Pokemon. His favorite Pokemon was Pikachu, and he loved singing and dancing. He loved soccer and basketball. He was full of life and joy, enjoyed life. Just was a super happy-go-lucky little boy that loved to be active, was an active member of Trail Life USA, which is like Boy Scouts, but it's more Christian-based. And he did that for 2 years. He loved it. Lydia was my daughter. She was 6 years old, just to turn 6, a few days before their tragic passing. And she loved unicorns, sparkles. She loved pink and purple, and she loved being with her big brother, Alec. Everywhere that he went, she went. It was like Lydia was his shadow. I would often find her playing with his toys together in his room instead of her own. And if I would ask her, Lydia, you have your own toys, she'd say, no, I want to play with Alec in his room. And so they were just inseparable. Super close. They were only 22 months apart, so super close in age, and they just got along really, really well.
Awesome. And this was leading up to the tragic event, and was it in 2024 when this happened?
Yes, May 2024.
Yeah, talk to us about the scenario. I guess the custody scenario that led up to their passing, and just kind of where things were and whether their father was at the time.
Yeah, so their father and I were going through a divorce. I separated from him due to severe domestic violence, with physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, all the abuse, coercive control. And so I finally made that choice to leave after 12 plus years of being with him. And they often say that leaving is the hardest time and the most scary time, because you don't know what's going to happen. And I knew that, but I knew that Alec and Lydia deserved to be in a safe, loving home without the power and control over the household always. And so I made that decision. I asked for a divorce, and his response to me stating that we were going to get a divorce was to come and get the children because he was going to kill himself in front of them. And so from that moment, that was October 9th, 2023, when he had that first suicidal threat, I called the police, and they came and they took him via ambulance for just a short check. Because he did threaten suicide, so they had to do their due diligence. But they did know that he would probably get released within a few hours, and that's what happened. The hospital didn't did end up releasing him within a few hours. So in those few hours, the police were with me and they told me to pack bags, to get all the stuff that I needed, to take Alec and Lydia to a hotel for our safety. And at that point, I'm leaving this abusive marriage, and I'm still not clicking in my brain that it could end in a familicide, if he was to come back to the house and see us all there. And that's what the police officers were alluding to. So that's why they wanted me to take the children to a hotel to be safe.
Couple of questions, if you don't mind. I know in some states, the threat to commit suicide can result in an involuntary 72-hour hold. Is that a thing where you all were, or
No.
was that not? See, yeah, okay. And then you said that, had you filed for divorce yet, or just told him that you were going to file for divorce?
I had talked to an attorney and I told him that I was going to file on October 9th, it was Columbus Day, so it was a holiday. So when I told him and then he said his response, the wheels kind of started turning more and more. I was going to file the next day. And now looking back, maybe I shouldn't have told him, but I don't know. That's just what I thought to do. And that's what ended up transpiring that day. And he got out of um, the hospital after a few hours, and then he went back home. And me and the kids were at the hotel. I let them talk to their dad and FaceTime their dad, but I didn't let him know where we were for our safety. And then the next day, I called the attorney, talked with the attorney, let him know what was happening. He started filing all the paperwork for the initial divorce and separation. And then I also filed for an order of protection, and that was granted. However, the children were not put on the order of protection. In Arizona, it's very difficult to put children on an order of protection because, like in many of these cases, they think that since you're going through a family court case, it's a civil matter and it needs to be handled in family court. And my order of protection was granted through the Superior Court. And so I asked for them to be on the order, but they denied it. And so at the time I was like, okay, I'm the only one that he's, abusing physically. I'm the only one that's in physical danger. At this point, I never would think he would have harmed them physically. So I was okay with their decision.
Sometimes, if the kids are involved, then family court would get involved if there's a child protective agency working to make sure that the kids are okay. But it sounds like your only involvement in the court was because of the petitions that you had filed in district court, I guess. So I think it's really important too that for our listeners to understand this time in your life, you've went through absolute just a nightmare to get to this point. But this point is where it's the most dangerous for women, is when you are able to get away. That's when you're in more danger at that point oftentimes. So this is I don't know, just a critical time in your life. So just can't imagine what you had to be going through.
Yeah, and I had victims advocates that were walking alongside me. They helped me file for the order of protection. They were telling me, what to put in there, what could be in there. They were, telling me, the order of protection, once it got approved, they were like, okay, you'll have access to your own home. So he's going to be served this paperwork and he's going to be asked to leave the home because on the order of protection, I was granted the residence because in our neighborhood, that's where the kids' school was. And I'm visually impaired, so I don't drive a vehicle. So in order for them to get back and forth to school, I was going to walk them. So the judge did grant that I would have the home to make sure that the kids could get back and forth to school with, less stress on myself. And so that's what happened. And, I remember the victim's advocate saying, don't go anywhere by yourself. Make sure you're always with a friend, which was fine because I didn't drive anywhere alone anyways. I always had somebody with me. So, but they were just making sure because they knew that, things could go sideways at any point. And a few days went by, and I put the kids in school because they weren't in school for that week because it was fall break. So when I asked for the divorce, when I filed for the divorce with the courts, when I asked for the order of protection, that was all during fall break. So the kids were home anyways. So I put them back in school. It was Monday, October 16th. My friend and I walked them to school. We let the school know, hey, we're getting a divorce. I have an order of protection. Here it is. We will give you any paperwork as it comes along. But right now, everything was getting filed. So there was no physical paperwork to give the school except for the order of protection. And so I went to the courthouse to update some paperwork because I got a new cell phone and certain things. And so while I was at the courthouse, I started receiving weird phone calls from him that didn't sound like him. He was speaking of Satan and demons, and saying that we didn't have a covenant marriage. And it just didn't sound like him. And so I called my attorney and asked him, hey, he's calling me. He shouldn't be calling me. I have an order of protection. He's breaking that because he's calling me. What should I do? And my attorney said, you need to call the police and you need to let them know that he broke the order of protection and that they'll file the paperwork for that he broke that order. And I said, well, I'm right across the street from the police department. Can I just go over there and talk to somebody instead of just calling? And he's like, yeah, you can go ahead and do that. So I walk over to the police department. We have to sit and wait for a few hours until a police officer comes out. And as the police officer is coming out, I get a gut feeling that I need to call the school to check on Alec and Lydia. And I've never had a gut feeling like this. I am a teacher by trade, so I don't randomly just call the school to check on my children. That's an odd behavior. But I thought, okay, I need to call and just check on them because it's been a lot on the kids. I want to make sure that they're doing okay. It's the first day back since all of this has happened. And so I called, and the secretary, said, oh, well, thank you for calling, but they were just checked out a little while ago by their father. And I was like, what do you mean they were checked out by their father? And she's like, yeah, he just checked them out. And so when the police officer came out to talk to me, yes, we did talk about him breaking the order of protection. But I also put in there like, hey, he just removed the kids from school without my knowledge. And on top of that, he's making these random phone calls that don't sound like himself and such. And the police officer was taking all the information down. And he said, have you been able to try to get a hold of him? And I said, I texted and no answer. I called, no answer. And it took about an hour and a half for him to call back and say that they were okay. And he wasn't supposed to talk to me on the phone. So he had Alec call me and talk to me. And I heard from Alec that he was okay. They were swimming. And so the police were like, since you talked to your son, we can't do anything. He has legal rights over them still. There hasn't been any family court paperwork stating that he has his rights taken away or any custody agreement. So we can't go and check on them. And because I was asking them, I said, can you just go and do a welfare check to make sure they're okay? Like, I'm talking to them on the phone, but can you go and make sure they're physically okay? And they said no.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine the fear, I don't know, a myriad of emotions that you were going through at that time. And there was no custody order in place. So I guess it's kind of
Not
I
at this
assume
point because it was only a couple days. So I mean,
right,
yeah.
right. So the law is essentially that you both have custody and work it out amongst yourselves, but you're not allowed to talk to each other. So how can those 2 things exist at the same time?
Yeah, we only could talk to each other via text message or email. So
Okay.
I could talk to him, but I wasn't hearing
Okay.
like cadence of voice or speech patterns or is he angry? Like I couldn't speak to him verbally. So that was really hard
Yeah.
because yeah, the kid seemed safe, but I didn't know what his mental state was because you can't really track that via text print.
Yeah, and even talking to the kids, I'm sure their judgment of that is tough,
Well,
and
they were 5 and 7, like, they
yeah,
don't know.
they
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah. Okay. So that day, obviously, there's so much going on in your life, but we move a few more months. Continue to tell us about this.
Yeah, so actually that same night, I made a plan with him to take the kids back to school the next day because that's what the police officer told me to do. I went to bed that night, with the plan in place, and I got woken up that night, a few hours after going to sleep about 11:30 PM from the Surprise Police Department stating that I needed to come to the hotel he was at and collect the kids, because he had called 911 on himself and he was having suicidal and homicidal ideations, and he was severely paranoid. He was in the middle of now what we know as psychosis. And so they talked with him at length and convinced him to go for a voluntary hold at a psychiatric facility. So they took him via police car to a facility. So when I got to the hotel, the kids were there, the police officers were there, but he was already transported via police car to the facility.
None of this triggered any involvement with Child Protective Services there?
Yeah, so it actually did. The police officers that were on scene made a report to DCS, Department of Child Services is what they call it in Arizona. And because of neglect on his part, um, because of what he was going through, but also the state of the hotel room was not safe. He had moved all of his belongings, including like tools and like a sawzall inside the
Oh,
hotel room. So like this hotel room looked like quarters, like boxes from floor to ceiling. There was like a pathway like that you only could walk through to get to the kids' bed and then walk to his bed and then walk to the bathroom.
uh-huh.
So, they made that report. And so a few days later, DCS, called me and spoke with me. I explained what had happened. I had stated, his their father was in a psychiatric hospital. DCS went to the psychiatric hospital, spoke with him, and they stated in their report that there wasn't sufficient evidence of neglect. I think partially because at that point, um, the next day, not only just talking to DCS, I had called my attorney and filed for a emergency temporary order, which is an order that is put in place by the judge without you being seen by the judge. And so they base it off of your statements that you make. And so we wrote all of the stuff that had transpired the day before, and I was granted basically full custody of the kids for a temporary basis until we were able to go to court the next time.
Okay. All right.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
please continue with that.
when
Yeah.
DCS was talking with me, I think they were thinking, okay, well, the kids are safe because she has full custody basically of them, and he's in a psychiatric facility, so he can't even see them. So I think that they were like, okay, they're safe right now. And so that's why they kind of dropped the case and closed it.
And he was still involuntarily, is that right?
He was involuntarily, and he was there. So for the emergency temporary orders in Arizona, they have up to 2 weeks for the couple, to go in front of the judge in person and explain why you need the temporary orders to continue or why they should change. And on what basis. So that's 10 days. They have 10 days. And so when we were talking with our attorneys, we're like, okay, he'll be out and we'll be able to have this court date. Well, he wasn't out. And we had to push that court date out even further than the 10 days. He was in the facility for 9 days and he didn't get released until a family member came and retrieved him and actually like checked him out and took him into their care.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they said in the psychiatric reports that I have now that, he wasn't safe to be around the community or safe for his own safety, so.
And at the time, was that just kept at the facility that wasn't shared with
that wasn't shared with the courts?
DCS or the courts? Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
I knew all of this stuff after the fact. I like to say, I couldn't gain access to any records because of HIPAA. I called the facility multiple times and I tried to get information, but he would have to sign a release for me to gain access, and he never signed that release.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Just like so much happening. I'm sure it was a whirlwind.
Oh, it was a whirlwind. I didn't know what direction was up.
So, as you had to put off the court date, did the temporary order stay in place where you still have full custody until that court date?
Yeah.
And then what happened once you eventually got there?
So when we went to our court date, which it was at the very beginning of November of 2023, so a few weeks after the incident occurred, I was in person and he was virtual because he had gone back to his home state to be with family. And so I went on the bench and I explained, he was in a psychiatric facility. He also is abusive, have an order of protection. He came, at this point, we learned more facts. So between me being at the police department that original day and him calling 911, he actually had come to the house without me knowing and tried to get inside. And then neighbors saw him and wrote a letter for us to put as evidence. And so even with that, even with all of our evidence that we had, and we didn't have police reports yet, we didn't have any of that stuff because it takes time. But the evidence we did have, we believed that, I would have full custody and he would have been able to have 4 hours of supervised time because that's originally what was in the temporary orders. But he never had 4 hours a week of supervised time because he was in the facility and then he went back to his home state. So he didn't see the kids for probably 30 plus days.
Mm-hmm.
And so he came in virtually, was very calm, very put together virtually. And he wanted 50-50 unsupervised. He knew what days he wanted. He knew he had explanations as to why he wanted those days. And even when he was cross-examined, we got evidence on him. So my attorney asked him, Brock, do you believe that your children were put in danger that night when you were in your psychiatric episode? And he said, no, because they were asleep. And he put that on the record. He said that verbally to the judge. And so we're like, okay, that's gonna look bad on him. Okay,
yeah.
The judge. And so we left that courtroom being like, okay, there is no way that this judge is going to give him unsupervised 50-50. He's going to rule something else. It's not going to be unsupervised 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
And so 48 hours later, which is very short for a filing, we received our court filing, and indeed, he was granted 50-50 unsupervised time.
Was DCS involved at all after that point, or was it just kind of in the court's hand as part of the divorce proceedings?
Yeah, it was in the court's hands. The DCS wasn't involved.
It sounds like DCS said basically they unsubstantiated the referral basically and said that there was not enough evidence for them to substantiate any kind of neglect. So, in some states there are what we call in-home cases where they could, do some contact with his hospital to see if he is a safe caregiver for the kids. But it sounds like that was not
No.
what they were doing there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you know anything about Arizona's DCS, like they're horrendous. So I mean that's a whole different thing from what I'm working on within family court reform. But DCS, they have had new legislation put in this session as well to protect children because it's bad.
Now, you were in what I would call district court at this point for your divorce hearing and custody. But were the children appointed an attorney at all?
No.
Sometimes kids are also appointed
Yes.
a guardian ad litem to kind of represent their needs, but
Yeah.
that's not always done in these kind of trials. So
Yeah, that was not done in my case.
Yeah. So when the visits started, or I guess not visits anymore at this time, it's 50-50. What was that like?
Yeah, so he had come back from his home state. He had to, get a job because he was unemployed at the time. And so he had to get a new job. He had to get a place to live. And then our first date for visitation was he was going to get the kids over Thanksgiving holiday that year, and it was 8 days straight. So I think that that's like a whole fault in the system that you can have children go with a parent after them not being with that parent for a significant amount of time and having all of the issues he had and just being like, oh, you can have him for 8 days straight without anything, like, go at it.
No check-ins of any type with anybody?
Nope.
Okay. So,
And
keep going.
yeah, so we were doing the 50-50. I believe at the beginning he was on medication. He was seeing an outpatient psychiatrist that was attached to the facility because after you leave the facility, they give you so many visitations that you can come back and see like outpatient psychiatric care. And so he was doing that. He was doing everything he needed to do at the beginning. We even asked for him to have medication compliance checks, and that was put back on me. It says in the orders, in the temporary orders, first of all, the judge couldn't find any risk factors that Alec and Lydia were in any physical, emotional, or psychological harm to not grant unsupervised 50-50, which is not correct. And then he also put in there that, I asked for this, or my attorney and I asked for this. And so if Hope wants to know if he's taking his medication, Hope can ask him. That's in the orders. How could I ask him? Because I have a protection order against him.
Can't talk to him, yeah.
I can't talk to him. And how is asking him yes or no going to do anything, Judge? Like, how is that going to show anything?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
not at all.
in other states, there has to be a verification of that through drug screens or whatever.
Yeah.
Not in there. That's what we wanted. That's what we wanted, and that's what we were trying to get at, with that request is we wanted drug screening to make sure that, he was taking the medication he was supposed to, or like some psychiatric notes to make sure he was going to therapy, something. Nothing. And then it was put back on me. And then we asked for a separate psychological evaluation to be done by a separate psychologist outside of like the facility. And that was granted. But that was granted in November of 2023. And he actually didn't even have the evaluation done until February of 2024. So several months later. And at that psychological evaluation, it states in the report that the psychologist believes that he wasn't being truthful with his answers. He was covering up certain things. He was, I quote, he is not as stable as he seems. And he also self-reported that he believed that his medications were not working. Both of those things were in the psychological evaluation. And this is my opinion, but I believe that the judge only read the summary, which didn't include those 2 vital red flags. Those were actually in the report. I don't know why. Again, this is a systemic failure, so I have no idea why the psychologist didn't put it in the summary. But he didn't. And so on April 4th, 2024, we went for a orders hearing for a hearing to go over the psychological report. And in those court records and on the record, virtually, our judge states, oh, well, I believe that this is a full, really good psych report. Like, it looks like, there's no issues. The only thing he needs to keep doing is taking his medication and seeing his psychiatrist. Well, you don't even know, Mr. Judge, if he's doing that because we don't have a way to track it. Like, me asking him yes or no and giving it to the court is not doing anything, And so he was like, there's nothing, we're just going to continue with this. And about a month and a half later, a little over a month later, the kids and their father he took his own life and they were murdered. So,
Wow.
Something about the assessment. There are a few different ways to approach those assessments, and the most common is, like you said, self-report. So the individuals being assessed, sometimes the only thing that the assessor knows is what they say happened.
Correct. Yeah,
And-
they didn't
and-
come and ask me any questions, which now I know, like, you're supposed to. You're supposed to, like, reach out to other parties involved and ask questions. None of
Yeah.
that was done.
It's often called like, a collateral. You're calling collaterals, but so it's interesting because there's different ways to do it. It's that's the worst way because you're only taking the word of one person.
One
So
person. Mhm.
it's really interesting.
And
It was just crazy to me that there was it was his word against my word the whole time. It was like he didn't have to give any evidence of proof of doing any of the things that the judge was asking. Like, it was just like, okay, cool, you're taking your meds. That's what you're saying. I'm going to go with it. Like, I don't need any proof. Oh, you're seeing a psychiatrist? Okay, I'm going to go with that. Like,
And to an extent, I understand from a legal perspective that you should not have the right to get his medical records and all of that. But the court certainly could have made him sign.
Mhm.
They could have court ordered him to sign a release of information
correct.
so that they could be sure that he was taking his medications and complying with recommendations so that they know the kids are safe. But that didn't happen either. So ultimately, sounds like no one is checking in on this.
Mm.
So, yeah. So the kids, I guess, as hard as it may be, tell us
Mhm.
what happened.
Yeah, so I took them to school. It would have been Friday, May 17th, and dropped them off. That was our drop-off zone. So I would drop them off. If I had them the night before, they would go to school, and then he would pick them up from school. And so that's what we were going to do. I dropped them off. They went to kids before and after school care. They were having a great time, signed them in, and left. And I thought it was just going to be a normal weekend. Saturday, nothing out of the ordinary. Sunday, I heard that they went to church from the pastors and the kids' ministry. They said that they saw the kids running up and down the hallways, acting normal, like their normal selves. They participated in kids' church. Nothing was amiss. And then somehow, some way, I will never have answers. That night, Sunday, May 19th, between 9:30, 10:30 p.m., the people in the apartment complex heard what sounded like fireworks, and now we believe those were gunshots. And even though they heard what sounded like fireworks, nobody called the police. They went out on their balconies, heard it, it stopped, and they went back inside and they didn't do anything. And so I didn't know anything was wrong until Monday, May 20th, when I got a phone call from the kids' school at 10:16 a.m. stating that they were not there that day and it was an unexcused absence. And so I thought, well, that's strange. It was only a 4-day week that week. It was the last week of school. And they were supposed to do all their celebrations. Lydia was supposed to graduate from kindergarten. And so I called, no answer. Texted, no answer. Called my attorney, said, hey, this is what's going on. I'm worried. I don't know why they would be absent from school. And he said, well, don't freak out yet. Maybe they're just at the doctor's, or maybe they stayed home from school and maybe they were sleeping when you called. He said, check back in like 3 hours. And then if you can't get a hold of them, then do a wellness check. And I said, okay, but I didn't take his advice. I only waited 45 minutes for my friend to come and get me and for us to both go to the apartment complex. And as soon as we got there, I saw his vehicle in the parking lot. And then I walked up to the door and I knocked and I couldn't hear any noise inside. And I called and I could hear his phone ringing from inside the apartment, from outside. And so I knew something was wrong. And so I called the police, let them know. And, they were asking me all these questions. The police arrived. They started asking me, like, why are you concerned? So then I had to give them the whole backstory of like what had already transpired, because it wasn't police officers at this point that had been to the incident in October. It was like new police officers that I hadn't interacted with before. So I explained what had happened. And I explained that, he was diagnosed with bipolar with psychosis. I explained that he, had a psychiatric break that past October. And I know they're just doing their job, but I will never forget them saying, well, when are you supposed to get them back? And I said, Wednesday. And they're like, well, ma'am, it's only Monday. It's technically his day. And I'm like, yes, but he's not at work and they're not in school. There's something wrong. And then they were like, well, do you think they could have gone for a walk? Do you think they could have gone to the pool? And so, I'm very calm. I'm not like frantic. I'm like, we'll have actually the maintenance guy was on shift that day and he'd stop by with his little golf cart and I explained what was happening before the police showed up. And he's like, oh, I've seen them at the pool. I'm going to go check for you and see if they're there. He went and checked, came back, said, no, they're not there. And then it started to like rain. It was like drizzling rain this day, which hardly ever rains in Arizona. So that will always stick in my brain that it was raining that day. And so finally, we probably have like 15 cop cars in the apartment complex, like parking lot. There's people on their balconies. There's people trying to get in and out of the parking lot at this point that can't. Finally, there's a police officer that came up to me and he said, hi, Hope, I'm a police officer. And then he gave his name and he's like, do you remember who I am? And I said, yes, you were at the hotel in October with the psychiatric break. And he said, yes. And he said, I'm very concerned. He said, that wasn't a normal situation and this doesn't seem normal. So I'm going to go ahead and call my sergeant and see if we can get the go ahead to go inside for everybody's safety involved. Is that okay with you? And I said, yes. And they got the sergeant's okay, probably in about 5 minutes. And they had the maintenance guy unlock the door of the apartment. They stated, they were yelling Lydia and Alec's name. I've seen that on body cam footage. I think that's really hard for me to watch because they don't answer.
Yeah.
And then they went inside. I waited in the parking lot with some friends and pastors, and 2 police officers came out and approached me and said, ma'am, we're so sorry to inform you, but all 3 are deceased inside.
Wow. Obviously that's unimaginable, and I'm so very, very sorry that that's happened. That's just unthinkable for any parent, obviously. And
it's the worst thing that a parent can go through. Any person on this planet can go through is losing a child, especially in this way.
and
In the scheme of things, Lydia, I mean, this is not that long ago. This is still very recent, at least in my opinion. I don't know how you feel, but you have done so much advocacy work in the last couple of years, and I guess my question is how? I don't know that for me, I would be able to still get out of bed, and you're out there doing so much in just a
short amount of time. Yeah.
Like, how are you able to do what you're doing?
It's a conscious choice every day still to this point. I did a lot of praying and talking to God, a lot of journaling, spending time in his silence. And it all started with my brother-in-law was like, I know you're going to all these grief groups and, you've moved back to Michigan now and you've tried to make a new community of friends through our church. But I think that it would be a really good idea for you to share your experience, your faith, your love for Alec and Lydia, all of the things that you've been through via social media. You should make a social media platform. And when he told me this, it was probably a few months after they had passed. And I laughed at him in my head. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But okay, I'll be respectful and like nod my head and say, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And so I just tucked it in my head for a couple of months. And it was August of 2024 when I decided to start my social media platform, Hope in the Pain. And from that, I met Rachel Holloway and Heather Norcraft from Like Mother, Like Murder. And I met Brandy Murray Poles through them, Rowan's mom. And we just started this campaign of Voices Against Filicide. And Rachel Holloway came to me with the idea of starting a podcast called Voices Against Filicide. And I said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Like, you already have this experience. Like, we could do it together. We could co-host it. And she's like, no, I'll edit it for you and I'll like do everything for you, but you're going to host it. And I was like, I don't know how to do a podcast. Like, before this, I was a special education teacher. So I'm like, I have no idea about podcasting, or I didn't even know what I was doing with social media. I just kind of just jumped in head first and it kind of just became what it is now. And so that's kind of how Voices Against Filicide podcast started. Is I kind of just was like, okay, we're going to do this. And we are starting in September of 2026. We will be on our 4th season of Voices Against Filicide.
Awesome.
What would you say your goal is for all of this work? What do you hope to, what's your purpose? What do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, I want to make sure that people understand what filicide is, that it is not this like one-time thing that happens just randomly, but it is a silent epidemic that happens in our country every single day. On average, there's 2 to 3 filicide cases in our country every single day. Just a couple of days ago here in Michigan, we had the biggest family annihilation case of 6 children and 2 adults passing away. And so, yes, that's not a filicide, that's a familicide because it's the whole family, but still bringing awareness to all of these things, because in that case, in every filicide case, there are always lethality risk markers that lead to it before it happens. There's always things that people can look for to stop it before it gets too far.
And so through your podcast, I'm sure that listeners can get to know some of those signs and be on the watch out either for themselves or family or friends. So as hard as it has to be, thank you for your advocacy. I can't imagine talking into a microphone about such topics, having lived through it. So heartfelt prayers to you for all that you do.
Thank
And
you.
w-
Yeah.
a- and we've been trying to get together with you for a while, but you have been busy because of the recent passing of the Alec and Lydia Act. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Alec and Lydia Act is landmark legislation in Arizona where the kids were murdered, and it is family court legislation that makes it so that if there is any sort of domestic violence or coercive control or mental illness, like suicidal or homicidal ideation in a court case, the judge has to automatically stop and look at all of those factors, and they have to state in their orders, in their temporary orders, what their conclusion is and why they grant whatever visitation they grant or whatever, custody agreement they grant, because we want to make sure that child safety comes first. So that is huge. And Arizona is like the 11th or 12th state to include coercive control under the umbrella of domestic violence, which is huge.
That is huge. That is just tremendous work for you. And I'm sure there were lots of other folks involved in making that happen too.
And unfortunately, it seems like there's a lot of this work to be done. You mentioned that's the 11th state. It should be 50, obviously. So, and I know you're going to continue to do that work. How can our listeners find and support the work you're doing and continue to learn about this topic and those warning signs you mentioned?
Yeah, you can go to voicesagainstfilicide.odoo.com, and it tells about my story, Alec and Lydia. Brandy Maury Pools is also on there with Rowan, and we share all of the stuff about the different lethality risks, and we share about the podcast and everything. And then you can follow me on social media, which is Hope in the Pain on all social medias, so TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And then you could also listen to the podcast wherever you find your podcast. It's Voices Against Filicide. Get caught up because, like I said, in the middle of September, season 4 will be coming out. And I also released my book, There's Still Hope, A Journey of Adversity, Tragedy, and Unshakable Faith, that can be found on Amazon. And I'm so excited. I just got it released on Audible, so you can listen to it as well.
Great. That's fantastic. Just blown away because, like John said, nobody knows how they're going to react in a situation like this or how their lives are going to look after that.
Yeah.
And I think you are doing all the best things. So just
Thank you.
very admirable work. We're very grateful. Definitely our thoughts and prayers. And if there are things that we can do, our listeners can do, please just let us know and we'll pass that along and just keep up the great work. And just super awesome to see what you're doing right now.
All right. Well, that's going to do it. Again, thank you so much for meeting with us.
All right. Thank you, Hope.
Thank you.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.